episode 3 of In My Garden. We're here with Adam Bresa at the Floyd EcoVillage Farm. Thanks for being with us today, Adam.
Thanks for coming out.
Yeah, we're really happy to be here and learn from you about soil. This is kind of where we are in the garden in the season, is kind of looking at what do we have to work with. And I'm curious to learn from you. I know that's something that you know a lot about, and you're producing amazing vegetables here at the EcoVillage, and I'd like to know kind of what you started with when you sort of broke ground here.
Sure. Well, the farm was started about 6 years ago. This was mostly just a pasture. The soil that we have at the farm is what I would call a sandy loam. So it drains really well. It's a pretty coarse soil. We don't have a lot of clay in it. It doesn't hold on to nutrients extremely well. We have a high water table, so it's got pluses and minuses like all soils. We're lucky that when it rains, we can come out and work in the soil the next day. We don't have to wait for it to dry out too much. But we also have to be really careful with our fertilization and making sure that we're not leaching out a lot of fertilizer, because the sandy soil doesn't hold on to the fertilizers quite as well as clay soil would. What we've done here to improve most of our soils, we have about 3 acres, and we grow on 1.5 to 2 acres every year, is cover crops. We don't really use any compost on the farm. We do in our high tunnels and on a few select beds, but it's just, A, there's not really a great source of high quality compost close to us, and B, it's a ton of labor to put down compost on that much space. Mm-hmm. Instead, we use cover cropping, and then we use biological inoculants, so basically probiotics for the soil that you would also find in a really high quality compost. So our approaches to improving the soil quality have been, getting our organic matter levels up, or at least staying where they're at, through the use of the cover crops, and then using the probiotics or biologicals.
Interesting. So as I'm listening, I'm realizing that you are doing exactly the opposite of what I'm doing. So I imagine, just because I have clay soil, that could be part of it. But also, I don't know anything really about biological, the inoculants and that sort of thing. So that's brand new to me. And the cover cropping is something I'm planning to start this year, but it always seemed like a challenge to know when to do it, or, I'd be like October or November and I'd say, oh shoot, I should have put a cover crop down. So maybe let's start with, just for gardeners, I know that's a different way of doing things. How would you recommend, if you're going to do a cover crop, times of year maybe to
Sure.
do that?
Yeah. Well, I think depending on the size of your garden, cover cropping might be more work than you need. So really the goal is to have something covering the soil surface at all times. So if you just got a small garden, it might be just as easy to put down your leaves in the fall on top of your garden nice and thick, and you're going to get that organic matter and not have to deal with a cover crop that you're then going to have to potentially till under or get rid of the next season. Mm-hmm. So I think one approach is just using mulching and not doing the cover cropping. If you've got the ability and the space to do a cover crops, you've got all sorts of options. So you can come in the early spring, like now, and plant things. Our favorites would be spring oats, and maybe a combination of, usually you're using a combination of a grass and a legume. So oats with maybe a type of clover or Austrian winter peas, and in the summer a popular one would just be buckwheat, which only takes 35, 40 days to mature. And then in the fall, same with the oats and a pea or a clover. And the nice thing about the oats is when it gets below about 17 degrees, they'll die. So you don't have to worry about dealing with them next spring. You'll just kind of have a mulch on top of your bed. And if you wait later into the fall, November, so you'll have to plant something like a rye, which will make it through the winter. Like we have rye out here. but it can get out of control in the spring and, you know, get 5 feet tall, and if you don't have a weed whacker or a mower or a tiller, become a lot of work.
I understand. So when you were talking about having it die naturally and become a mulch, do you just leave that there and just pull it to the side and put your seeds in or plants in, or do you actually pull that brown matter out?
I think in a garden, absolutely the best thing would just be move it away and use it as a mulch. Yep, the less you're disturbing the soil, the less you're disturbing all those beneficial microbes and the fungal colonies that are living in that soil. So tilling's great, right? It makes everything easy, but it's actually horrible for the soil. Even just broad forking. Anytime we get in and we do some soil disturbance, we are killing millions and millions of bacteria and fungi that we want to have in there. So the least disturbance, the better.
This is great because I haven't done any of that digging yet, and now I know, and this saves us time. I mean, this is great news. So every year I think I need to get in there with my digging fork and double dig it and get it all fluffed up. But that's not right. I need to leave it alone and let all of that kind of stay that I've worked on building up. Is that right?
That's what I would do,
Yeah.
especially if you've been at it a couple years and you probably added a lot of amendments to the soil, so it's probably already got a little bit of tilth to it. It's a little fluffier. It's probably not like you just turned over a clump of sod and it's really hard and you have to get in there and like completely break it up. You know, and if you're going to disturb the soil, the shallower the better. So those little like mantis tillers that look like a weed whacker, like those aren't bad. They only go down a couple inches, or if just rake the soil surface, but the shallower the better.
Okay. So I'm just going to recap and make sure I understand. As you're building a new garden, of course you're going to have to disturb the soil.
Yep.
You're going to dig it, you're going to fluff it up, you're going to add your organic matter and try and create a looser tilth. Could you define that for me, tilth?
So your tilth is basically the way that the soil feels and smells in your hand is the way I could describe it the best. So you've got your soil structure. So your soil is made up of clay particles and sand particles and silt particles and rocks, and then your soil texture is basically the percentages of those in relation to each other. So on one side you have a really coarse soil, which would be sandy, and on the other side a really fine soil, which would be a clay, and then in the middle you've got a loam. And so the loam is, you know, a good combination of each of those, and so your tilth is then taking whatever that soil texture is, plus how much organic matter you have in it and how much water it's holding at that time, and you know, the life in it and what it smells like. So your tilth kind of changes. You know, you don't want to go work your soil when it's too wet, and you also don't want to put seeds in it when it's just bone dry and it's not going to rain, right? So you get in there and you touch it and you smell it.
Okay. So when you feel like you've got the tilth that will work, will grow seeds, at that point you want to leave it be as much as you can.
Yeah.
And so when I'm adding organic matter from here on, I don't really want to dig it down. I just want to put it on top, or?
You could totally just use your compost, if you're buying compost, as a mulch.
Okay. And that way the worms and whoever's living down there kind of help to move it around.
Exactly, yep.
Awesome. I'm learning stuff. And how about this method, sheet mulching? This is what all gardeners in Floyd were telling me to do when I first moved here, was take some cardboard, lay it down on this ground. I had already dug it a little bit, right? Because there were so many rocks. I got the rocks as best I could, and then I put the cardboard and then a layer of mulch on top and just left it. And in another year, I had worms, which was really exciting because there was no real life in that soil. What are your thoughts on sheet mulching?
Well, I've never actually done any sheet mulching myself,
Okay.
and I've definitely talked to people that have done it, and it seems like a good technique. A lot of what you're seeing small farmers do now is sort of a variation on the sheet mulching, and we'll take large silage tarps, so like the UV treated pieces of plastic that you can get them, pretty big, 50 by 100, and lay those down over a field and get them nice and tight with either covering the edges with some dirt or rock bags or something, and leave them for a year, and then pull it back, and you've killed all the grass, you've killed all the weed seeds, and you're ready to just go in there and plant. Kind of similar to the sheet mulching. Everyone I know that's done it has been happy. Whenever we've put down cardboard on the soil and then tried to plant in it, sometime later, I just feel like for us, it's always been the grass wins. So I think if you're gonna do it, you wanna go really deep. Make it nice and thick.
With the mulch on top.
With the mulch on top, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Because the cardboard just disappears. Which
Right.
That was sort of amazing to me. But yes, the worms eat it. I'm not sure what happened to it, but it wasn't there. So it seemed to work for loosening things up. And all right, so you've given me some good news. My back is going to thank you. So much less digging. This is exciting. So you mentioned microorganisms. This is brand new for me. So can you talk to me like a very, very beginner?
Sure. So what's happening in the soil is very similar. The plant's relationship in the soil is very similar to what happens like in our stomach, right? And we all sort of have this idea that we eat food and then we have all these bacteria in our stomachs that break it down and make it available to us. The exact same thing goes on in the soil. So a plant sends out its roots, and a plant can access some of the nutrients that are in the soil, but it's not able to access everything. And so what it does is they form symbiotic relationships with beneficial fungi and bacteria. And the plant, through photosynthesis, is making sugar. And what we now know is that the plant sends over 50% of its sugar down into its roots and basically feeds the beneficial bacteria and fungi. And in return, those bacteria and fungi are accessing minerals that the plant couldn't otherwise get, or at least get as readily. And they can even help get water. So what we want to do in our soil is make sure that we have those beneficial microbes to give them a kickstart. And there's lots of ways to do that. That's one of the benefits of using a really high quality compost. You can also purchase these biological inoculants now from places like Seven Springs, where they have different strands, and you can inoculate your seedlings. If you're growing your own seedlings, you give them a little sprinkle, or however it comes. There's liquids, there's powders, and starting that relationship with the roots when they're really small is really all you need to do. Now on our scale, we'll continue to apply the inoculants throughout the growing season. But we have found that using these products has been one of the biggest game changers on our farm as far as healthy, disease, pest-resistant, free plants. It's really helped a lot.
Great. Well, will you show us around?
Sure.
Give us a
Love
little
to.
tour of the EcoVillage. We'd love it.
All right.
Okay. So we've got spinach.
So this little plot here is one of the few areas that we're turning into permanent beds. And we've been taking advantage of the early warm season, unseasonably warm. So we've got some spinach, kale, lettuce. Underneath the landscape fabric, we have carrots seeded. So we're keeping those covered for about a week, and then we're going to uncover them and hit them with like a little flamethrower to kill all the weeds, and then hopefully the carrots will come up in a weed-free bed.
So when you hit them with a flamethrower, it doesn't kill the carrots?
No, it's just gonna dry up all the little white threaded weed seeds that are just popping. Now, if you got it when the carrots were starting to pop up, it would kill them. But carrots usually take 10, 14 days to germinate. So those have been covered for a week. So we feel pretty good that if we hit them right now, that the carrots haven't popped up yet.
That's a good tip. And I did read that recently, that covering your carrots while they're germinating is the way to go. I've never tried that.
Carrots are a tough one.
Yeah. My carrots get to be this big and then they split. I'm assuming the soil's not soft, loamy enough, I guess.
I think carrots are definitely one of the things that are worth buying high quality hybrid seeds for.
Okay.
The seeds that you find for carrots, like at Farmer's Supply or Ingram's, that are just an open pollinated carrot, they're tasty and good, but the difference between the expensive carrot seed that's usually all hybridized is completely different.
Okay. So a hybrid carrot, high quality carrot seed.
Yep.
Okay. And then you've got a lettuce mix?
Yep, so we transplant a lot of things that other people, I guess, would direct seed. So for early plantings, we'll actually transplant a salad mix. Spinach is another thing. In the tunnels, you'll see we transplant all our peas. We transplant radishes, turnips. So it gets us a jump on, those have probably been in the ground 2 weeks, maybe. And we've got some in a tunnel that we're already harvesting.
And so why do you decide to transport, just for the jump on the season?
Jump on the season. Easier to keep weeded and cultivated. So like that salad mix, if you were planting in your garden, and you're broadcasting it over your bed. Mm-hmm. Now, if you had a nice weed-free bed, it would be great, but we don't. We have a ton of weeds. Yeah. And so
Me too.
It's a lot easier to, I cultivated that whole bed yesterday in 10 or 15 minutes. So you can just go through it. There's no weeds right in that clump. Mm-hmm. Each one of those clumps of lettuce is probably somewhere between like 7 and 10 seeds.
Okay.
So we start them in the greenhouse and as like little clumps of salad mix.
Okay, so when you're harvesting, then you just cut it right
Exactly.
off and you've got your
Yep.
mix ready to go.
Yeah.
So that answers a question I think I had is I get a lot of volunteers in my garden and the end of the season, weeds. But I look at them and I'm like, I know what that is, and I have a really hard time pulling it out because it could be something good. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe I need to get over that. What do you think?
I don't know. We have random stuff. We have some random like mustard plants that were planted last spring, and how they're still here, I don't know. But we just didn't till them under or cut them, and I guess it really is a matter of whether or not you need that space for something else. They're not hurting anything.
Right. Yeah. I guess I'm looking at this, and the benefit is because I see I don't want to cultivate, which I know is a better way to go with like a stirrup hoe or something mm-hmm. like that, rather than pulling them individually, right? But if I have a ton of volunteers in an area and I'm afraid to let them go, then I'm not cultivating, right?
Right.
And then weeds just take over.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Good point. Yeah, what you want to do is cultivate and not weed. Mm-hmm. So.
And say that, explain what the difference between the two in your terms.
So for me, cultivating means working the soil surface very shallowly when you often don't even see the weeds. Weeding means you see the weeds and you're often on your hands and knees picking them out or hoeing them. But even yesterday, we went through this, and if you just move the soil a little bit, look at these. Yep. There's white. Cultivating is when you get the weed in what they call like the white thread stage, where you don't see it really, but if you move the soil a little bit, you'll be like, oh my goodness, look at all these weeds. Look at all of them. Just moving the soil around a little bit and getting them in the sun, there's thousands of them. They're all gonna die. This was a flower plot last year and it all went to seed, so there's billions of seeds in it.
And I have the exact thing I had. For me, it was cherry tomatoes.
Mm-hmm.
My garden is going to be covered in those. So I'm going to get over the whole, difficulty killing things. That's my garden challenge.
And depending on what your soil structure looks like, too. So we had those rains, and, we get a crust on the soil after a rain. Great time to cultivate because you're not getting any oxygen into the soil. You get that crust and it's kind of keeping the soil from breathing. So we try to get out and cultivate as soon as we can after a heavy rain. I mean, we're not going to do it in the mud, though we have when we saw plants that were just like dying because they're stuck in wet soil. But we came out quickly, yesterday and scuffed this all up, and now the soil is breathing again, and we killed a ton of weeds.
Yeah. So really, it seems to be so much. The biggest thing is the soil. The plants are almost secondary. Is that true? That's how it seems to me. It's like, as far as the focus.
I think you're right. I think you've often heard like a healthy soil makes a healthy plant.
Yeah.
Right. There's some interesting soil scientists out there now that are proving that a healthy plant will make a healthy soil, and that it's actually easier to grow a healthy plant than it is to grow that healthy soil. So if you can use those inoculants we were talking about, but using them on the plant leaf surface and doing all of your fertilizing through foliar sprays, so feeding your plant through the leaf surface, that plant is then going to have a stronger root system and is going to be releasing all these sugars into the soil, and you're actually going to build your soil structure faster by having a healthier plant.
I love when there's so many sides to things.
So here's one of our high tunnels. So this is that same salad mix. We planted it maybe a week or two earlier than the stuff out in the field, but you can see we're able to come through here and just cut a bunch.
And are these onions?
So yep, then we've got scallions. We also do lots of spring onions. We've got kale, peas. We transplant our peas. So we've got a lot of peas in the ground already, in the tunnels and in the field. If we go in the other one, I can show you some other stuff. We got carrots in here too. So almost all these beds will be tomatoes. We do all of our tomatoes in the tunnels, and so we do a lot of intercropping, planting different plants in the same bed. Just to fill the space out, basically. We want this thing full with something growing in it all the time. So when we get around to planting tomatoes, in these salad beds, we won't take that salad out. We'll just plant the tomatoes in there with them, and then eventually the salad won't be worth it anymore, and we'll cut them or pull them out and take them to the compost pile.
That's really nice. And so is there a lot of planning? Do you plan ahead about that? Like you kind of already know when you're going to put your tomatoes in the salad
Absolutely.
bed?
Yeah, the best we can. We make a garden plan. What I always tell the folks that work with us is like we try to make a really detailed garden plan on what we're planting, where it's going to go, when we seed it, when we hope to put it in the ground, when we might potentially start harvesting it, and then usually that gets thrown out the window the first time we actually plant something because it's rained or it's too dry or it's icy. And so like for instance, this year we've already put in 700 pounds of potatoes, and I think we had snow on the ground last year right around now.
We did. Yeah.
Not a good time to plant potatoes.
Right.
So
you plan and then you roll with the punches.
Exactly, yeah. It's constantly switching and reevaluating what our priority for the day is. And like we had spinach overwintered in this bed, and we took that out yesterday so we could put some beets in it. Same kale that overwintered. We transplanted turnips in there, and then that'll be tomatoes in about 2 weeks.
The kale, where the kale is?
Yep. We'll just take those kale plants out. Here's an example. Like once again, we transplant. You can see those radishes. So early in the spring, we want to have an early crop. We can get out and actually transplant things like the radishes and the peas and turnips instead of direct seeding them. And that's because we have a greenhouse and we've got the space to do it.
And the whole point is so that you can really control and cultivate the soil. That's why you would.
Yeah, and for like the radishes, it's a lot easier for the peas and the radishes. We can get them germinated and growing off to a good start in the greenhouse versus putting them in some wet soil, waiting for them to germinate. Even if we didn't have a weed issue, it still just speeds up the whole process.
Right. And this is.
That is weeds and
Yeah,
carrots.
So take a look at that, Fox. It's just an example of what would happen if you weren't doing anything here.
Pretty much. I don't think that we've done any weeding in that bed. It just kind of, we didn't really like the germination of the carrots, and we have tomatoes ready to go in there pretty soon. There's not enough time to plant something else in there.
So you, before you put the tomatoes in, how will you treat this? Just rake it out, or?
Yes, we will assess whether or not we want to keep any of those carrots and if we're going to actually spend the time to weed it. And if not, our technique is usually to, so we don't use a tiller in here, but I wouldn't call it no-till. We still disturb the soil surface. We'll take a wheel hoe. You got one of those? You know what I mean?
I don't have a wheel hoe.
So if your garden is big enough, this is the best tool you could probably ever get. You know, and there's all sorts of different makes, but wheel hoe is basically putting a stirrup hoe onto a wheel, and you can push it. There's also other attachments you could put on the back of it. But we'll take this and go over the bed to go under about an inch or two, you know, kill all those weeds. And then we'll take our broad fork and we'll broad fork the bed. Then we'll put down our soil amendments. And in the high tunnels, we do use some compost. And then we'll work those in, usually with this. And then you'll end up with a bed similar to this one. So it's still a little rocky. The last thing we do is take one of these tine rakes. I think they're also called landscape rakes, and we'll kind of break up some of the clumps. This bed we might actually come in and put some water on it first and then go over it one more time to get a little bit finer. But you know, we're not, depending on what we're planting, we don't need it to look, the more I've done this, the less I've been a stickler on like it has to look just so perfect. You know, it's okay to have some clumps. I actually like having all these clumps of roots in here.
So you leave them?
I'll leave them, yep.
Because they are going to break down and become organic matter?
Yeah.
Okay.
And here's another great, so these rakes are great when we're talking about cultivating. You can actually take these if your garden's big enough. And run them right over your plants.
Wow.
And they don't take the plants out. You know, you have to wait a week or two for your plants to set in. But you're getting all those little white threaded weeds and you're not killing your plants.
That's amazing.
So
I would never think you could do that right over your plant.
Yep. Great way to do like a real easy cultivation. And then, you know, I mean, you can look down. We did it yesterday and there's still millions of them. Easy way to go out there like every couple days and hit your plants.
This is my goal this year. To
get this?
cultivate, well, yes, that too. To cultivate and not weed.
Yep.
That's the motto, the mantra. Okay.
Let's see, we don't have a ton else in the ground, but I've got one other little
This is
plot.
a cover crop, you said?
So yeah, this was planted last fall. It looks like it's rye, and there's a lot of chickweed in there, and there might be some Austrian winter peas. But we'll start turning under. If you look out, we've got inside this fenced-in field, we've got a couple plots that are already tilled up, and then the rest of the cover crop. So the other thing with your cover crop is, if you're going to grow cover crop and it's growing. So when they're still growing, and you're going to turn it under, they're going to release a lot of nutrients into the soil. We'll call that a green manure. Sometimes people. You don't want to turn it under and then immediately plant your crop. It takes a couple weeks to break down, so you always have to be looking ahead 2-3 weeks. And oftentimes, when you turn under a really lush cover crop, and that high organic matter will attract certain pests. So onion maggot is a really popular one. We wouldn't want to turn these under and then plant our onions right away. We would just be asking for onion maggots to come in. So we're going to plant onions today out in this far field that we tilled about 2 weeks ago, and we feel pretty good about putting it there.
Okay.
But we've almost filled up all our tilled soil now, so we need to till again, thinking 2 weeks from now, what are we going to need to plant?
And so then we'd start to till these that are still have cover crops and let them sit.
Yep.
Well, this is impressive, Adam. I can see why you have such good produce at the farmer's market.
Thanks.
Speaking of the farmer's market, with everything so up in the air right now, are there plans or ways that we can get food from the EcoVillage now?
Yeah,
Okay.
we have a couple ways. We have a farm store here, so that's open every day. It is an honor system. Right now we harvest a couple times a week. We have greens. We're also a pickup location for Sweetland's raw milk. And you can also pre-order bread from Big Indian and have it delivered here. And then we have a CSA program that we still have some openings left. And the pickup for the CSA is here at the farm as well.
Okay,
Yep.
great. So if we wanted to get on the CSA, how would we do that?
You can go to floydecovillage.com and go over to the farm section, and all the details are there. You can email me at floydecovillage@gmail.com, and if I can answer any other questions that you might have. Our CSA runs 26 weeks long, and we give everyone 2 vacation weeks. So you pay for 24 weeks of veggies, you get 24 weeks, and you get to, but it's a 26-week long season, so you get to take 2 weeks off if you want.
Okay, great. Well, I do hope you'll go to the Floyd EcoVillage website and check out the CSA. Hopefully we will get back to the farmer's market, and you can come talk to Adam at the farmer's market. And we just really appreciate you having us out and taking the time to talk with us and share your knowledge.
Great, thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.